Welcome, and thank you so much for being here today for our third session in our Fitting in Financial Education Fall Winter 2024 webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about building a classroom economy. We are here for just an hour together today, and we have a lot of wonderful resources and content for you. We'll begin with some housekeeping items. If you have not yet, if you could please sign in with your name and school or district into the chat, that will be the first step in us, or rather Linda, getting you the clock hours that you deserve for being here. We will make sure that all the slides and resources that you see today will be available for download in PD Enroller and also included in the post-webinar email that you receive. And you will rate and evaluate this training in PD Enroller in order to receive those clock hours. If you are able, we would appreciate if you can turn your cameras on for us presenters. It's always easier if you're not talking into the void as it is. Thank you so much. Please do be aware of mute and unmute, and we love the participation. Please feel free to interact with us within the chat to answer any questions that may come up. I am going to begin today with a land acknowledgement. This is a map from native-land.ca, and I wish to recognize the Indigenous peoples who have been dispossessed and displaced from their ancestral and spiritual homes and the taking of their land through colonization. I acknowledge that I am joining you from the unceded lands of the Spokane people, and the Spokane tribe's ancestors inhabited much of northeastern Washington, which consisted of approximately 3 million acres. And these lands were once the major trading center for the Spokanes as they shared this place and welcomed other area tribes through their relations, history, trade, and ceremony. We also want to acknowledge that the land holds the spirit of the place through its knowledge, culture, and all the original peoples since time immemorial. Thank you. So welcome again to our webinar today about creating a classroom economy. I am your host, Amy Cleaver. I currently serve as the K-8 program supervisor for the Financial Education Public-Private Partnership. I'm delighted to see so many familiar names and faces in the training. If you have come before, I very much appreciate your time. My background, I am Pacific Northwest born and raised. My background is in classroom education, everything from PK to adult ESL, 5th grade, 7th grade, math, social studies, and social emotional learning at my latest site. I also focused on peer-to-peer instructional coaching, and I consider myself a financial wellness work in progress. If you've been in any of my trainings before, you've heard me refer to financial wellness. That to me is our overarching goal in financial education so that our finances are in harmony and a positive influence on other aspects of our physical, mental, emotional, and social wellness. And I am so excited and grateful to be joined today by Tim Rhodes. Welcome, Tim. Tim is a retired educator and a FEP fellow, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. Tim?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm equally passionate about financial education, and my kind of a background story a little bit. My first experience with financial education, I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I grew up down in the Puyallup area, and we went to Enumclaw to an animal auction, and unbeknownst to me, I scratched my ear, and my dad bought 4 chickens. And so it was sort of my introduction to the natural consequences of finance. And I spent 40 years in an elementary classroom, 3rd through 6th grade. I tutored math up through high school, and I've been now this year as a semi-retired teacher. I'm substituting as well, and I enjoy just the opportunity to take some of the financial educational literacy concepts and embed them into a culture of the classroom. So it's not just simply something you teach, it's simply how you approach your management and how you approach just your day-to-day endeavors in class with your students.
Absolutely. So Tim and I had this classroom economy in common. Obviously, Tim has a lot more experience than I do, but I'm so excited about putting on this because there were things we would have in conversation that would never have occurred to me. And so part of what's so great about our FEP Fellows program, about these webinars, is we get the chance to learn from each other. This is one of those programs that will constantly be evolving. As we're moving through, let's see some introductions here, and I am going to tell you a little bit more about the Financial Education Public-Private Partnership. I am also launching 3 questions in the Zoom poll here, if you would not mind answering those, if you're able to safely interact with your computer. So the Financial Education Public-Private Partnership, or FEP, we have been around since 2004 when we were established by the Washington State Legislature. And our goal is to increase and enhance the financial education that Washington students are receiving in our schools. And we do this through professional development, just like the PD you're attending right now. We do this by reviewing financial education instructional materials across all grade levels, specifically focusing on our special population students as well, and making those resources available on our website. We also facilitate a very exciting grant. If you are somebody who is looking for some funds to increase financial education in your district or school, you should check out our website for information on that as well. And as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about classroom economies, and Tim and I could probably talk about this for hours. So we're going to go through the basics here. We have an hour scheduled for our PD, and then we will be available afterwards if you want some extra time to dig into some of the resources we're going to share, or if you have questions. We will absolutely not just leave you hanging. Our goal is that you can walk away from this and thinking about, hey, how can I actually make this happen in my class? Or how can I enhance it? What's already happening within my classroom in regards to either a classroom economy or financial education. So we're going to kind of talk about classroom economy in ways students can earn, ways students can spend, and ways students can save. We'll give you a couple different options that Tim and I have both explored throughout the different ways our economies have evolved over the years. So first, I'm going to go through just a few basics. What is a classroom economy when we're speaking about it? And really is a system that simulates real-world economic concepts within your classroom. We use a currency, and that part is very important for students to have earning, saving, spending opportunities. And they are able to exchange that currency for something, whether it's a need or a want, a prize from the prize box, a privilege like lunch with teacher, or something like that. Currency can be anything, and it is really this is one of the first questions you really want to think about, because you're going to be dealing with it so much. You want it to be something easy, something accessible, something that's not going to cost you a lot of money or time to create. Look for free downloads. That's our first piece of advice here. Make sure you customize your cash. We're going to show some photos of how you can do that. That also is great for building classroom community. You know, this is our cash. They will ask, especially if you're in elementary, is this real money? And you may have to reinforce a couple times that it is not, all part of the learning process. And make sure that you are able to guard against counterfeiting when you are considering this, especially if you're with older students. So for example, I only used the cardstock that the school secretary ordered to create the class cash that I used. So it was very distinct colors. It was obviously the cardstock weight made it a little more durable, but you couldn't just go buy these colors at like a Staples. They were the kind that you ordered in bulk. So that was my way of making sure that an enterprising student just couldn't just go home and start creating cash. And before we move on, I was asking in that first question in the Zoom poll there, what your mindset was before coming into today's webinar. And it looks like we have a lot of people who are just here to learn, which is amazing. Thank you for being here. And a few people who are considering a classroom economy. So definitely if questions come up as we're going through this, please let us know. And then one person who is committed to starting one. Amazing. I hope that you're able to connect with us afterwards. Just for fun, we're going to go through the rest of these questions. So that was, we put some holiday spending in because I always think consumer finance is an interesting thing to learn in any context. But just so you guys know, 55% of people last year planned to buy gift cards. Clothing and accessories is next, 49% buy that, followed by books, video games, other media, and then personal care and beauty care is the last most common thing. And according to USA Today, the 12 days of Christmas would cost us about $49,000 today in 2024. Interestingly, the partridge is the one that has gone up the most in price from last year to this year. So thank you for your participation in the Zoom poll. So if you're considering implementing a classroom economy, there's a lot of great reasons to. Part of it, of course, is the financial education that we are embedding. Like Tim has said, that we're living and breathing every day when we are using a classroom economy. And the other fantastic part is that it's wonderful classroom management strategy. Money is a universally understood content, has a universally understood context. And for most kids, it is universally engaging. You are able to give them concrete examples when you say, oh, we want our kids to be responsible. Well, what does that mean? We can actually show them responsibility in different forms with a classroom economy. Our natural consequences are ones that mirror real life. And of course, we emphasize human capital. And that refers to the knowledge, the skills, the education that we possess. Human capital increases our income ability, and we usually develop human capital through education, through training, through experience. And Tim, is there anything else that you wanted to add on to this slide?
I think the big thing, just to talk about implementing a classroom economy, is just think about what is your outcome? What do you want to get out of it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that Amy said, it evolves. I had a classroom economy for about 39 years, and it never did it look the same every year.
Mm-hmm.
It changed depending on the needs of the kids, and especially on the needs of me and how to maintain things. And so the evolution is actually part of that growing and evolving process as becoming a financial educator. Is we'll talk about more later on, but just give yourself some grace to really just try a couple things out, and then if it works, great, and if it doesn't, that's okay. Live and learn. Yeah.
And I'm so glad you said that, because when we were talking about this and going through our rehearsal, I'm very, list oriented. And so in my head, I'm like, well, you have to think about like the currency. What am I going to use first? And it was Tim who really refocused that and said, what is your purpose first? And I think that is a fantastic point. And both of our programs or parts of our program evolved out of need. So not just what is your purpose for the kids, but what can help you as an educator. I was a second year teacher drowning with 34 fifth graders. I did not know what to do. I picked up a book that had a classroom economy and I thought, oh, if I give them all jobs, that will help me manage everything. And it took off from there. Later, Tim is going to talk about his pay for assignments based economy or pay based system, and how that was born out of COVID and the lack of accountability and engagement we were seeing from students and are still seeing from students. So not just the purpose of what you want your kids to get out of it, because they will get something, trust me. But what would help you if you are going to put the time and effort into implementing this kind of system in your classroom? Our advice is to start small. You can absolutely go piece by piece with this. We're going to go through, for example, 4 different ways students can earn, and you can build on each of those and stay where you're comfortable for as long as you want. The most important thing is consistency and sustainability. On a classroom management side, we know that consistency helps us build relationships and helps our students feel safe in our classrooms. But when it comes to these sort of economic needs and wants, and us saying we're going to, have a payday on one day, you want to make sure that you're able to keep this up to keep not only the kids engaged, but to keep them learning and applying some real world financial skills and concepts. Again, just feel free to add complexity at your pace. And if you're able to, buddying up is a fantastic idea. Not only does it share work, which is so easy to maintain, but then we get away from, that shooting the dart, and I hope my kid gets the good teacher this year and has a good experience. And then maybe every kid can have this great learning experience as well. So as you're starting to think of your questions, maybe some questions are already popping up in your head. And if they are, feel free to drop them into the chat. I chose to focus some questions about like the current state. When I'm going through it, I was like, what am I going to use? I decided on class cash. That seemed like the thing that made the most sense to me, right? I had to decide where they were going to keep it. I had to try and connect it to other school-wide PBIS programs that I knew my administrator would both appreciate and perhaps require. And I also had to think through some of the negatives, right? You want to prepare yourself. What's going to happen if kids lose it? Tim, what happened to one of your students? They washed it?
In my classroom in the past, I've always had a cash economy. I didn't want it, even though I'm old school, I know that. But it was the idea of a cash economy. So the kids would get money paid on a weekly basis in cash. And I stress that one, if you bent your money, it was thrown away. But what happened recently, I think it was actually beginning of last year, somebody had a whole bunch of money on their desk. Somebody spilled their water bottle accidentally. The cash got wet. I don't replace cash if it gets wet. You lost all that money. And what happened out of that, an evolution of that, as we talked as a class, we created a classroom savings that was online where you could actually, every 2 weeks, deposit a certain amount of money to protect it from safeguards like being bent or stepped on or water dumped on it or whatever it might be. And it was one of those things that had naturally evolved out of a need from the kids. And was a group we worked on, okay, how can we solve this problem? Because things happen. Yeah.
And we had different approaches in that, whereas I was not quite as picky. I mean, anything ripped, we would have to talk about, what do you do in real life if you rip a dollar? But some of the students it would come back crumpled, or I would accept it. But I did sometimes, as an extra earning task, allow students to cut the cash. And there was like one student who was notorious for being very quick and not neat when he did that. And so those dollars became kind of notorious throughout the classroom. And kids got really excited when they found one so you can really make this anything that matches your kids, or your relationship with your students. But definitely involve your kids in developing this. Don't just show up. I mean, you can, but I wouldn't recommend showing up with a list of jobs and saying, we're going to do this now. Work with them to develop the ways they'll earn the class jobs, the responsibilities of those jobs. And as we start moving through the earning options, we'll see how that can really develop some amazing social emotional learning opportunities as well.
Can I add something to that really quick, Amy?
Absolutely.
When your goal, you'll know your economy is successful if the students are engaged. And one of the things, if it feels like to students, or to me, I suppose, if it's a top down where I made all the directions, they're going to do it all, then it's not engagement. There has to be a buy-in. And like Amy said, I was much more anal about stuff because I wanted there to be a really high level of engagement. So if you didn't take care of your money, and I was and I still am, even though I'm 17 now, a huge advocate for natural consequences. If you're going to get sweat, the natural consequences, you're done. Take care of it. If you put it in your pocket and bend it, I literally just rip it up and I don't replace it. You're out of luck. It may seem kind of harsh, but the reality is I never had anybody, and I did this for 39 years. I never had anybody complain that I was being too tough about the money. It was just simply, that was the culture we established, and those were the ground rules, and that's what we lived with the whole year.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. So as we're mentioning, this hits so many standards. And I think just even what Tim was just describing, like some of the social and emotional learning that you're going through when you are recognizing that some things aren't going to be replaced every time you lose them, that's absolutely like an important developmental skill for our students in their college and career readiness, in their social lives. And so within this slide, I'm not going to go through it and list everything. If you want to reference back, like I said, this presentation will be available to you. But just to know, we do have financial education standards in Washington, and a classroom economy embeds them in your day-to-day, all day, every day in a way that is incredibly powerful for spending and saving, employment and income. Tim was just talking about risk management. How often do we get to introduce young learners to the concepts of risk management and avoidance in a way that's concrete that they can understand? And this is that opportunity. And of course, financial decision making. We hit a lot of the social studies standards from K-12 in the economics, obviously in economics area, especially E1 and E2 in almost every grade level. And for SEL, I mean, honestly, you can find a SEL standard that attaches to this in pretty much every single one as well. But what I really wanted to highlight was the social management and the social engagement, because those can sometimes, I know, feel very abstract, right? How am I going to teach social management to, like, for in my case, seventh graders? Well, this is one of the areas where you can model. Um, for example, one of the roles, one of the jobs in my class was a line monitor. That's always tricky, right? So we have to practice the sentence stems that I would provide to them. How do you politely correct someone when they're out of line? And how do you receive the correction without getting defensive, and giving them opportunities to role play that, which comes in very handy later on down the line. I'm not going to lie to you. So just to know that there are so many standards, if that is something that is important to you or your administrator, that you can demonstrate hitting within this. It's great for parent-student conferences too, I would say. Parents really love seeing their kids applying these types of skill or taking them through their folder or their bank account. So let's go ahead and talk about income. We're going to talk about earning first. This is our first little section, probably our biggest section, because we've done so many different things here. So please don't get overwhelmed. Just recognize this is ideas meant to stimulate hopefully some ideas of your own. Maybe you can learn from what worked for us. So ideally, as we mentioned, we're going to have a classroom economy that is giving real life practice, earning, spending, and saving. Now, Tim and I use really different vocabulary for ours. I was income and expenses. I know Tim used the terms credits and debits. You can use whatever works for you, whatever works for your students, just as long as you're consistent and they are understanding what words mean money going in and what words mean money going out. So we're going to go through all of what you see here. We're going to do a weekly allowance or student pay. We're going to talk about flat wages for class jobs, a wage scale for class jobs, and then looking at pay for weekly assignments. So if we're starting at probably the most basic level of an economy system, would be all students receiving the same wage, right? The same amount in exchange for simply being a student. In this case, there is no employment exchange in here. This is great for our younger learners or any group that needs specifically scaffolded support. So we're reinforcing here that learning is being a student is, of course, a child's primary responsibility, right? So it's great to use a sticker chart or punch cards to track earnings. This is a simple way to keep track of things in the beginning. This probably has your lowest teacher time investment as well. And there's a great equality in student experience here. Everyone's getting the same amount of income, right? And hopefully everyone has the same opportunities to exchange that income for a reward or a privilege within the same time frame. So I would say with younger students, I know Tim, you had brought this up, paying weekly is really important with the younger kids because they need that reinforcement, that time. It's hard for them to conceptualize into the future, so we want to be timely with our payment. With older kids, I think we can practice delayed gratification and mirror real life by looking at biweekly pay. I always lined up payday with my payday. I don't know about you, Tim, but that's how I did it. Um,
I was always monthly. That was a problem. So I didn't want to
oh
wait
yeah,
for kids.
yeah. One thing to just note about this, we use the term allowance, but we recognize that all students, even everyone here in this PD, may have had different experience with that term allowance. Some people are simply expected to contribute to their household culture or household through chores or work, and that's just their home culture, and that there's nothing wrong with that. So you just want to make sure you're holding space for those discussions if they do come up. And then we have an example here. This is one of Tim's examples of a punch card. So this is the bank of your class. And you can see you can mark with anything, a marker, a sticker, up to 75 points or dollars that could be exchanged for something else.
One thing on this,
Yeah.
I used to call mine the bank of knowledge because I said we're money is real life or something like that. And so the idea of this is I have two of these cards. One was $1 through $50, which was the first semester. And then the second semester, it was $1 through $75. And I'll talk a bit later about I taught the concept of inflation. And this was the fourth and fifth and sixth graders, that how your prices go up, but your salary doesn't as much. And so this is how I started my banking long before I used cash economy as money. I used these, what I call them as point cards. Same idea, but a simple concept. Yeah.
Love it. If there's any questions on these, please make sure you let us know. If not, we're going to move on to kind of the next step. It's not much more complicated, but slightly more complicated. So this is students receiving a flat wage in exchange for performing a service. So we're bringing that economic vocabulary into this. They're performing a service, in this case, a class job. So we still have students all earning the same. We still have parity of experience in that. But we have students taking ownership of the classroom, of the day-to-day maintenance of the classroom, of the rules and procedures that we have put in place and agreed to as a community. So again, really encourage engaging students in creating those lists of jobs and responsibilities. One of the later slides, you'll have a link to a Google Doc that has what my 7th grade class had decided on. One of our jobs is called a nose guardian. It caught Tim's attention when we went through the first time. This was just the person who set up our classroom diffuser every morning, but they decided to make that a job. They named it the nose guardian, and it was one of the most popular jobs. I was doing this anyway, right? It really simplified my mornings. I'm not going to lie to you guys. That's one of the great parts of this economy. We both would recommend rotating your jobs and randomly selecting jobs. We are all not going to love every job we have. And it's great practice from the beginning of students developing a work ethic where we're giving it our best, even if it is not the thing we want to be doing right now. Again, replicating real life with that biweekly pay. So some of the benefits to this, you can balance if you want to do some sort of checkbook account where you're tracking, or a register where you're tracking how much income those kids have. If everyone's earning the same amount, you can do this in a whole group, right? And it's very easy to see if the math is on or off. If you're within the 4th or 5th grade area and you're starting your decimal operations, this can be a great thing to integrate into math to reinforce those decimal skills as well. The other thing is that it's discouraging in socioeconomic hierarchies, which may sound crazy considering he was talking about 4th, 5th, 6th, and I taught 5th, but they do exist in the real world. They exist when you put cash into a community. And so when you have varied earning opportunities, we're always going to have more enterprising kids, right? Just like we always have the kids whose arms are up. You always have those guys in your classroom, bless them. But you want to just know with this, you're really going to discourage that. So sometimes, depending on the chemistry of your class, this just might be the way to go, even if like developmentally they could handle another level. So in this example, this is like how my economy worked for the first 4 years. Everyone had a different job. We had Katniss, Ron, and Thomas, shout out Maze Runner, um, um, doing their different jobs. As you can see, Katniss works once a day as a nose guardian. Ron is holding the door several times a day, every day. And Thomas is a banker. He's only working 2 to 3 times a week, but they're all earning the same amount of money to do their job. Also, I do recommend student bankers just to help manage, check math, takes takes a little bit off of the teacher load. Okay, so we're going to add in another component here. We haven't talked quite about spending yet, but when we do, one of the things students can spend on, in my classroom anyway, I charged monthly rent. So in this case, I would want to kind of think, if I was planning it out at the beginning of the year, all right, if everyone's going to earn 150, how much am I going to charge for rent? I charge 100, and then every student has the opportunity to save $50 a month. I'm going to tempt them with all kinds of things. So they might not save it, to be real, or they may have fines or something else to pay, but they have an equal opportunity to save. So that is another positive of this.
Can this write
Yeah,
my story?
yeah, of course.
So going coming back to the idea, like if I look at this and I say you're paying 2/3 of your income towards rent, that's a lot of money you're paying. Because usually they say, I tried really hard when I was doing my economy to mirror real life. So I would so here's a good example. A long time ago, probably 15, 20 years ago, I charged monthly rent for my desks. And I had this really cute little Washington State license plate, and every month I got a new tab. Like we get tabs for our registration. I hit the caveat one year. It worked really well for like 4 or 5 years, where a kid said, I don't want my desk. And then I was in the dilemma. Oh, so this is one of the things I was telling this to Amy a couple of days ago. When you do this, you need to think ahead of time. What's the potential outcome if they don't want to pay the rent?
Yes.
And because I literally had 1 year, again, like 15, 20 years, I quit charging rent about 20 years ago because I had and I was in a portable, by the way, and I had half my class that said, well, I don't want a desk. I'll just sit on the floor. And it was like, okay. So I pushed them all aside.
Now
And
what?
it became an issue. It was like, oh, shoot. Because in real life, you can't make them pay rent. Matter of fact, I used to say you were pedestrians in the school of life. These little terminology, but they like pedestrians in the school of life. And they're like, uh-oh. So whenever you have these consequences, whatever it is you're going to do, just think what's the potential opposite and be prepared for that, because kids are going to, that's what I got about kids and adults. They're going to find little angles on stuff. And that's what happened to me. Like, oh, I didn't think of that. So just something to think about.
There's always the angle finder, right? There's always one in class. So as we keep on the subject of class jobs, and for some reason, I think I had read this in a book. So this is where I moved my economy into, this is sort of my final evolution of mine. We kept receiving income in exchange for providing a service. But then I introduced a scaled wage. So there was a range of wages, a range of pay, and wages were determined by job frequency. Apologies for the typo, I will fix that. Job frequency, the difficulty of the job, and or the level of responsibility. As I moved from 5th grade to 7th grade, this seemed to make a lot of sense naturally. But because students were still rotating jobs, it did not lock anybody into being in a lower, quote unquote, income bracket for the entire year. I did think that with older kids, I wouldn't want to trade jobs as much, that they would want to just have that routine, especially when I was rotating blocks and I was only seeing kids for like 1 period a day. I was wrong. I don't know if that'll be your experience, but I'm just letting you know I was wrong. They absolutely like the variety and like to switch it up every month or 2 weeks, just like the younger kids did. So what I really liked about this scaled wage system, I was trying to connect this human capital and income earning potential thing. I wanted them to recognize that there are different levels of responsibility within different career choices, and that they should hopefully pay commensurately, right? Um, Again, you're replicating real life. You've got biweekly pay. I moved to small group account balancing, which worked fine with the older students anyway. So that was just me being able to monitor. We had much more frequent withdrawals and deposits at that point. But again, it's just easier to do it with a small group because people are going to be earning different amounts. You can still model the process with everyone, but just know there's a higher probability that you could get some math wrong, which is not the end of the world, really. Um, in mine, it might have been in Tim's. And then, but the empire building is absolutely something you might see here when students are consistently getting the opportunity to earn more. And I'll show you like kind of that savings example as we move on to the same example we looked at before, but with the same jobs, but now they're scaled. So now the easy job that everybody wants is the same amount, 150 per month. Ron, because he's having to get up and do something very slightly physical, but still multiple times a day, is earning slightly more at 175. Now, Thomas, still working less than everybody, but bankers in my economy had to pass a math assessment proving that they had high decimal proficiency, and they could be fined if they did not pay close enough attention to their clients' accounts and made frequent errors. If you're counting on somebody to help you maintain your finances and you don't do that job, there has to be some commensurate consequence. So I implemented that kind of system, but
That's
they're
really,
earning $200 a month. Yeah.
so I was wage scale the whole time, and
Hmm.
only because I started off at the beginning with having lots of the accountability and the accounting and the math, it overwhelmed me. And so
Mm,
what I ended up doing is just say, we're just going to go to a cash economy. Because when I had
mhm.
that point card system, which saw the beginning, I would write every kiddo a check, and they'd have a deposit form, and they would fill out their forms, like, because that's what it was like 30 years ago, 25 years ago. I went to over, oh, I don't know, it's probably been about 25 years ago now. I went to a straight cash economy.
Mhm.
I didn't even have them balance. I didn't have a banker. I just said, "Here's your cash. You keep." That's why I went to being almost kind of anal on how I was taken care of. And
Right.
what I did, and I don't know if it comes up or not. My jobs initially, there was two tiers of jobs. One tier was based on the United States and Washington state government. So I was actually embedding, because civics is economics too. So I
Mhm.
was embedding civics into all this. Again, it's building that culture. So it was a little bit different, but it came out of that evolution. But the idea was is that they could have a way to make money on a classroom jobs that I had set up previously, which were based on the Washington State or the United States government. And then we also had, which Amy will talk a little bit later too, is the idea of building some entrepreneurial spirit a little bit, where they could actually
Yes.
see a need and create their own job in addition, because they saw that here's something that's not being covered in class, and I have the
Mhm.
desire to want to make more money on my own, I guess. So
Yeah.
just a little bit, just everything's a little bit different how you come across that stuff.
I want to circle back to what you said at first, though, because I think it's important to kind of note this. I also started off having my students write me a check for rent every month. And I would just say that is an obsolete practice that you do not have to worry about trying to replicate anymore, guys. It feels like it's what we should do because it's what we learned. And while the practice of the register, which is just like keeping track of your debits and credits, right, is a great practice. I really wouldn't worry too much. I know it might be what you may have gone to or envisioned with that classroom economy is like, oh, they have to write a check, but you can keep it realistic. I'll show you. I'm going to share with you guys my Google sheet later. I made a digital checking account because I was like, this is what happens to me. I open up the computer and my money is there on a words on a page. And so I was trying to replicate that experience for them. But I think it's important to kind of recognize how we maybe learned it is not what our kids are going to be experiencing. And that's totally fine, right? Feel free to personalize this to what you know your kids like. If they're all crazy about Roblox, theme the whole thing about Roblox. You know what I mean? Whatever works for you. Um, all right. So now Tim is going to tell us a little bit about, sorry, wrapping up there. So the wage scale example, As you can see at the bottom there, savings are going to range now. So you have kids that are going to be able to save up to $100 a month. And when we get to talking about the spending opportunities, that can make an impact. So just something to be aware of. And now we're going to move away from class jobs and into something different, which is Tim's system and of receiving weekly pay for assignments. And can you start, Tim, by just telling a little bit more about where this came from and why you felt the need to change it up and start this?
For 30 years, probably 35, probably 33 years, I never did this. I just simply had a cash economy. I never paid because I thought I'm not going to pay for work because that always kind of made me feel icky. But over again, as this whole thing as we're evolving, when we hit COVID, all of a sudden there was no accountability. When I was in class, I could do accountability and I could do things. And I thought, okay, how can I maintain this classroom environment that has this financial literacy being like this, remote, where I'm one place and there are some place, I had kids sometimes in India, I had kids sometimes in Florida, I had kids sometimes in Eastern Washington or Western Washington. And so what came out of it is I needed an accountability piece. And so I came up with something simple as just a spreadsheet where the kids would turn in their work and I did it all online, and I would just simply pay them for doing their work. Never paid for grades and never did it on a equal scale. I knew the kids, and so I knew how I would differentiate how they earn their money depending on knowing who they were. But it came into a spreadsheet. So the idea was it was basically a really easy way of holding the kids accountable, holding me accountable, and holding the families accountable. Because as Emily's about to show you, I used a color scheme. And so I used that color scheme as a way of tracking classroom management and student responsibility. And again, it wasn't based on grades. It was simply based on, as I told, matter of fact, I made my students job cards. Your job is to be a student. I'm a teacher. I had a job card. I said, here's my job card, Tim Rhodes, elementary teacher, whatever. And I would, at the beginning of the year, make them each 10 or 12 job cards, and they could keep them and put them on, and they'd pass them out to people. Hi, my job is to be a student and learn. And so it came out of that. And it's only been the last probably 7 years that I went to this system, only because I need to have some physical way of understand something. This is a lot more labor intensive. So once you start it, you got to maintain it. But I got in that habit. You just did it. So if you want to show that, is it the next slide?
It's coming up in just a second, but I just want to come back to what's your purpose, right? So maybe what Tim just said keyed in something with you. Are you having trouble with accountability with your kids and engagement right now? Maybe this, or a simplified version of this, or we start something like this, is the way that would help both you and your students. So we have your example first before the spreadsheet, Tim, just so you know.
Okay. I've taught this, by the way, to, I've had, matter of fact, a lot of middle school and high school teachers, especially the learning center and things, they've loved this because it's real life accountability. It has nothing to do with grades, because some of those special need kids, grades don't matter. It's just simply, are you doing your job as a student? So I've had lots, I've taught classroom economy classes probably 10 or 15 times. And it came out that middle school and high school sometimes liked it even better because it was just simply a visual way of seeing accountability, how you're doing as a job, how you're doing your job as a student. So,
well, and it's an equalizer because those students who maybe are not at grade level are still getting the same earning ability as those kids who are, which is that was a mistake I made one time. Is I had one student who just got so far behind, he got disengaged from everybody. And I know part of that was some of his learning disability. So I think that that's a really great note on equality or like parity of experience again. So your scale was about $20 for on time, just you turned it in when you were supposed to turn it in. Doesn't matter how many you got right or wrong, but when it was due on Monday, it was in the basket or whatever on Monday. But if you got it at all, they still got $10. Correct?
If they turned it late, it was $10. Yeah.
Yeah. But anything that was just not completed was a 0. So if little Ken Griffey Jr. had 10 assignments in a week and turned in 8 on time and 2 late, out of $200 potentially. Little Kenny's going to get handed, right? You would hand it out.
Yep.
The cat 180. And if he's complaining about only getting 180, you have a built-in reason to turn little Kenny's mirror on himself and say, well, who was in charge of that little Kenny, right?
And it happened daily, by the way. They'd always
Yeah.
So
I'm first going to show an example of one of Tim's spreadsheets. And then I'm also going to drop into the chat the kind of cleared example that we have developed for you. So you will need to make a copy. If you are familiar with Google, of course, you already know this, so apologies. But Tim, if you want to go ahead and kind of take them through it while I'm getting that link ready.
Yeah, so this is just a Google Sheets. And it's not very hard to do, but if you look at this, each week I'd have that first column, I'd have a list of what week it was and the students. And then I had certain assignments. You can see up on the top the assignment and when it was due. And then you could see a pay scale, a sliding pay scale. Now the one thing that Amy told you before, in the first half of the year, I would pay $20 for an assignment on time, 10, and then 0. And then after the first semester, I would take the pay and increase it by half as much and double the cost in the classroom by twice as much. And I teach inflation that way. But the idea is in a spreadsheet, you can see I would have a running total. And here's the nice thing. If I have kids that were doing, say, math and they weren't at standard at all, I might say, okay, your math assignment, you just got to do the odd numbers or just do 1 through 5. And then they're turned in, they're fine. So I could differentiate it and it would not show on here because this was not based on any kind of grading. It's simply based on if you did. I had some kids, if you just turned it in, that's good. I'll count that as you're fine. But the idea is you can see it's a running total. So each week, my guys, and you can see when this is what I show parents, green means you're on time. Fuchsia means you turn in late. And red means you never got it turned in at all. And then as a teacher, I could start seeing trends. Oh, I didn't do very well on that socialized stamp bag. Maybe I need to go back and reteach it because look at all the kids that I've read. So it was a good accountability system. So I'd always tell the kids, hey, you want to be boring, lots of green. And when it came time for parent conferences, because I let parents have access to this as a view only, they could say, how's Johnny doing? Well, let's look and see. And by the way, Johnny and I would meet every week and talk about it because when I paid him, I did the paying, I would pull up the spreadsheet, we look at it, we talk about it. Okay, Johnny, what's going on here? And it was always, every week was a do-over. So it was like it's like Groundhog Day for economics. It would start over. So if you didn't have a good week that week, new week next week. And so you can see then lastly, you can see the scale, and then I had to pay, and then I always did the average so they could see how is the average compared to everybody else. Right.
Oh, the math teacher in me just loves that so much.
And the thing is kids did not touch this. That's the one difference when it came to maintaining this. And again, I worked with 4th and 5th and 6th graders at the time. I maintained this. And so the problem is it takes a little bit of time, but once you get in that routine, it was just something. And the one they can say later on, I would have this for the bottom, a tab for September, for October, no, for I had every month had its own tab. And you could see it. If you were middle school or high school, you could have a tab for each period. Do it that way. It doesn't really matter. But it was just and so this was just simply not are you passing or not, what your grades are. It's simply saying, are you being responsible as a student? And they say, well, Mr. Rose, I'm irresponsible. Oh, so why is there all these fuchsias? Or why is there all these reds? And I would just kind of call the task.
So I love this. There's so many different directions you can go with it. Like you said, you can make it as easy or as complicated as you want. In the example document that I linked, I put just 2 assignments every day for a week. I left a space for 10 assignments a week. And I figure you guys, you're teachers, you're smart. You can customize it however you want it to be. So if you look, there's an example. That one will let you play with different numbers and see how they change. We put all the formulas in there for you. Your weekly pay will automatically collect. So just know that there's an example. And then down at the bottom, there's different tabs. I started a January and a February one just to see if anyone wanted it, they would have it ready to go. And then we're going to look at the savings tabs down there in just a minute.
And I would just
So
copy
we've
and
spent,
paste it. I just copy and paste the formulas into the next week.
yeah.
I didn't want to redo it all. I just copy and paste and start over. Yeah.
So class jobs, again, you're going to get a link to a whole list. Make it work for you. I was okay having somebody take attendance on my computers in the morning. You may not be. Whatever works for you in your classroom. Here are some photos of what Tim was referencing earlier when he connected his jobs to not so much classroom responsibilities, but the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the government. So if this is something you're interested in, when it comes time to do the evaluation for the class, please let us know. We would love to do a follow-up talking about how to explore and set up something like this in your classroom as well. But for now, we're going to talk just a little bit about spending opportunities because we both had a lot of different spending opportunities in our classroom. And it is important when you're giving them a chance to earn, you want to give them a chance to spend as much as you can as well. So we have a bunch of different options here. Let's go through them somewhat of a pace for in our last 10 minutes. But like we said, we will be here for anybody who wants to look at some more things in detail. So rent, we've kind of had a chat about rent. It can be a little bit tricky sometimes. It connects to a lot of real world experiences. A lot of my kids were renting. So it was very authentic for them. Their parents appreciated that they were kind of learning about this real life process. And it gave us the opportunity to talk about discussing the pros and cons of renting versus owning. Um, so traditionally, though, like Tim said, kids are renting their desk space. So what do you do when a student can't pay rent? Some of these systems, like Tim was saying, like I even did, involve removing their desk or their belongings in the case of not paying rent. And like Tim said, I also found this ineffective. It's a consequence maybe the first time, but especially actually with both my I didn't even try it with seventh graders, but my fifth graders at a certain point, it was cool. There's no natural consequence connected, right? So I had to come up with something else. All students paid the same amount of rent, obviously. If you could not afford rent, you had to hustle. Because if I asked your mom and dad what they did when they couldn't afford rent, they would tell me they hustled to keep a roof over your guys' head. That's what I would tell the kids. So they don't have enough for rent. That's fine. You can work in the cafeteria after lunch instead of recess for a $150 flat wage per day. But if let's say Edgar only owed me $200, right? He has to work 2 days. That'll give him $300. He can keep that extra after he's paid me back. That's not like a fee or anything. But it was a requirement. And it was considered it was expected that if they couldn't pay rent, that is what they would do to afford rent and get clear back into the black, as they say, with their account. But I also allowed them to save up and they could purchase their property. So we had table groups. So when they purchased their property, they got special purposes. They got privacy. I brought a desk into the classroom for them. And so then they didn't have to share space or community supplies with everybody. They could decorate their space. They could put signs on it or stickers on it. They could do what they wanted. So they could continue to purchase properties. It kind of did become like Monopoly a little bit of a couple of years, but they really enjoyed like the goal. It gave them a ready-made short-term goal, save up to buy my property. And so that was a good thing that we all had in common. And it didn't, sometimes with saving goals, everybody wants something different. So Tim, I know, you would charge just for the day-to-day expenses of being in the classroom. And you can see kind of his list here.
One of the things that we did is the very first day of school, I walked in with my phone bill, my sewer bill, my electric bill, my gas bill, and said, you know something? I and your parents have to pay utilities every month. And so I set up initially, okay, you need to use the bathroom? Perfect. $20 or whatever we set the account up to be, right? And so the idea then is we came in, and this was a list that we would brainstorm the first couple days of school. And at my school, it was always based on safe, responsible, and respectful. So we as a class would come up and say, okay, what are some things that ways you can make money, but also ways where you need to be safe, responsible, and respectful. So the income and you had the expenses. And these were lists that came up with the kids, and you can see And by the way, when I had my kids the first day of school, I always gave them $1,000 to start, because I want to make sure they have money to start off with, because, life's not equitable, life's not fair, but at least for the first day of school, they all have the same amount of money. So it was fair for the first day, at least. Then we came up with this list, and this was always posted in the classroom, and we referred back when we could look at it. And so it was something, it was setting up that culture of financial literacy in the first week of school.
Other spending opportunities that you can integrate include fees and fines. Although I would make a note on this one. This is one where I say learn from my mistakes. I had a police officer kind of role, which is pretty common if you go on like Teachers Pay Teachers or whatever. If you look at these programs, you're always going to find some sort of like rule enforcer, right? That just didn't really work in my classroom and for my grade level. It wasn't creating the kind of positive community that I wanted us to embody. And so we decided there were many leaders in the room, but there was only one boss, and her name was Miss K. And everybody else was just going to go back to being, a leader and encouraging the right behavior. So I would really kind of advise staying away from that type of role or putting that kind of responsibility on students. Like I said, if you explore any of the ready-made options, you'll see this. I just haven't found it successful. But fees and fines that did work for me was the speeding ticket. When you went so fast through the work that I couldn't even, tell what you did. Now, granted, this was 7th grade and this was math. Clearly my system and Tim's system were really different, right? So just again, whatever works for you.
Yeah, they run.
The technology fines are great. Anything that's valuable, we should treat like it's valuable. So if you have one-to-one technology, if you have a computer cart like I did, if you weren't plugging that in correctly or not plugging it in, that was a fine. These things are expensive. When we break technology, we do have to, replace it. And then Tim, you did the naming tax.
So the naming tax was really simple because it would drive me nuts. The kids wouldn't put their names on it. So first week of school, I'd say, okay, naming tax. If you don't put your name on, it's $5. And I'd put it up there. And every time we had a 3-day weekend or longer, the naming tax would double. $5, then 10, and then 20. I think it was by December, winter break, it was $640. By midwinter break, in my district, we had a midwinter break in February. It was $1,200 and something for each one. And then by spring break, I threw in the trash because at some point, but it would evolve. And I would just say, if you don't have your name on, I would just say name, and I'd paste it on the wall someplace, and they'd have to pay me the cash to get it back from them. And it was one of those things that I don't know where it came from, but it just evolved out of I got tired of kids not turning in their work because their names on it. They would just turn it in, and I'm not gonna try to decipher. My time's too valuable to try to figure out who wrote this. So I just throw name and throw on the paper and say, okay, pay me. So.
And then the other thing that both of us did give our students spending opportunities was a class store. And we had different approaches to the class store. I know, Tim, you put everything from notebooks to pencils in there, whereas mine were more like, oh, I remember we were talking about this. You could go, we had a community cupboard. So you could get the community cupboard pencils anytime you wanted. But if you wanted a Ticonderoga, you had to come to the class store and spend some class cash on that, because my kids called them the buttery smooth Ticonderogas, were a hot commodity in my classroom for some reason. My last couple of years.
That's the good stuff, by the way. Yeah,
they're the good ones. So there's no wrong way to build a class store. Start with, every time you go to a conference, right, you get free stuff. Just start accumulating that. We know kids like anything. They're like little magpies. They collect. Quickly, before we're wrapping up here, I just want to talk about saving opportunities. We talked a little bit about the purpose. We want kids to feel engaged. They're saving money, right, or accumulating money. Let's say they're not spending it on weekly rewards. Well, what's the point? What are we going to do with it? And both of us did end of year student auctions where they could buy real things with fake money. Tips for this would be to continually accumulate auction items. I know, Tim, you said you would always hit up summer garage sales to look for good things to include at a discount.
I'd ask parents to donate stuff too, and they would be great to help.
donations from families and businesses. And then I would always provide a low stakes practice opportunity for an auction that may be really outside of some of our kids' context, especially if they didn't grow up in the United States. So introducing what an auction is, like going through the auctioneer kind of process and letting them go through it a couple times in a low stakes way is a great way to make everybody feel like they can be successful. But it gives them something to look forward to. It gives kind of like a motivation to this whole system. And as you can see from some of the photos that Tim has provided for us, this can be a really fun end of the year thing. I taught 7th grade and I actually worked it out with the other teachers that on the last day we would bring all 3 blocks into one room and they could all do the auction from my homeroom. And it was just it was a chaotic day, but with all 3 of us in there, it was a really fun experience. So last thing I just want to share with you is that you will also be you'll be receiving a link to something that looks a little bit like this. This is our example. And it is a sort of a savings account. And it's based off what Tim had used for his class. He had kind of shared how that had come out like, oh, they spilled water on their money. What are we going to do? So here's just a spreadsheet, again, with the formulas that Tim were using to kind of calculate. As you can see, it gives them 2 opportunities to access their money throughout the month. I really wouldn't do any more than that. Do not let them access it whenever they want. You'll never do anything else. And then it calculates their end of month balance and adds 10% interest, keeping track of it for you throughout the year.
And it was
The
always
auction,
voluntarily too. They didn't have to save.
oh yeah, of course, right?
If you wanted to save, you could. If you didn't want to save, you want the risk, so be it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm very aware of time, but I just want to make this one point here on the example that we sent you. I crafted this example so you could have this conversation with your students. Violet is going to deposit and withdraw erratically throughout the year, right? And you'll kind of see what she ends up with. Echo is going to deposit $50 faithfully and never withdraws. And Powder is going to make 2 large deposits at the beginning, and then she's never going to touch her savings account again. She doesn't withdraw from it and she doesn't add to it. And then see at the end of the year that they're, Violet and Powder are a lot closer than you think they are as their end of year totals. So there's just 3 different saving strategies that I kind of put into the example there that I thought if you have the opportunity, it'd be a good way to talk about, how interest affects our outcome in this. But with that, we are up against our 5 o'clock deadline. Like I said, we are going to stick around for a little bit. If you have time, you are more than welcome to stay. But if not, thank you so much for being here with us for this hour-long PD. I hope that you got a lot of ideas. I hope you do not feel overwhelmed, but seeing that there are so many different ways you could make a costume economy work for you. And just know that in your email in the next week or so, you're going to get the link to a bunch of these spreadsheets. So you don't have to make them if you don't want to. You could just jump right in and see how it can work for you and your students. So thank you, Tim, so much for being here, for sharing your expertise with us. And if anybody wants to, if you're going to, as you're heading out, I'm just going to go ahead and move on to one more slide here. So you can see we were talking about evolution. We've been talking about progression and how the classroom economy will change. So I did mine over 8 years. And on the left is sort of how I started with my classroom economy. We're looking at, that flat wage. Everyone's earning the same. Everyone had a folder. It was yellow. We kept track of all of our money on paper, just sheets. And then we had an envelope that they decorated that they kept their cash in. We balanced our accounts on the 1st and the 15th, or those closest days. I used math time twice a month. That was it. We had safe, responsible, respectful as well. We had something called Coyote Pride cards. So I said you could trade 4 of them for $20 in class cash. And I really didn't open a store for years. All of my incentives were, a positive phone call home, lunch with me, something like that. By the time I ended in 7th grade, I had switched to this digital checking account. And like I had mentioned, I had put it all on Google Sheets. I had made it automatic. So if you had told me when I started in 5th grade, overwhelmed with 34 kids, that I was going to end up with this, I never, ever, ever would have expected it. And so just another way of saying, let this go where it takes you. And just know that you will be receiving, like I said, so much of these fun resources to make it even easier for you as you kind of explore some of these options.
Can I circle back on one last thing?
Absolutely, Tim. I'm going to put it on your final advice with
Oh,
your
there it
email,
is.
just in case
Never mind.
anyone wants to write
There
it
it is. I have
down.
the back.
Well,
Start
yeah.
small, give yourself some grace, make sure it serves the purpose you want to do, and really just grow with it with the kids. By the way, I would do I do an auction every semester, but
Oh, wow.
in this old, yeah, I do it every semester. But in this thing, start small, and like I would not jump into a spreadsheet on a savings account until I was really comfortable with just figuring out the purpose of my management and my money system. The other thing is, here's my email. If you have any questions at all, let me know. I actually presented something like this, even a little bit more, in Fort Lauderdale last September for a national education conference that takes what we're talking about even to a little bit higher degree, which might be kind of cool to do as a later class. But if you've got questions or concerns or say, hey, how can I do this? Please feel free to email me. I would love to help out. I have a lot of passions, but this is one of my main educational passions, is to build kids awareness of financial literacy and just to be able to live it instead of just being taught it. It's kind of I don't know, it's a big thing for me. So any way I can help, let me know.
I'm so glad you said that, Tim, because I just dropped the Google folder into the thing. And Tim, your presentation from that national conference from the Council on Economic Education, I included it in there. So if anyone wants to take a look at that as well, to really look at if Tim's ideas resonated with you, that's going to be the place to look as well. My contact information will also be on here. Everyone who stayed a little extra, wow, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much. This is one of the things where we generally mean it when we say reach out to us. This is literally my job. And as Tim just so eloquently said, it's his passion. So we are genuinely here. If you are trying to get this off the ground and you are like, God, I'd love to start it. I don't know where to start. Please reach out. We are so here for you. And we come from a teacher-centered point of view. So thank you again. Please feel free to head out. Have a wonderful night. And hopefully we'll see you at our next training next week.